How's everybody's summer so far? If you can say what you've been able to do while social distancing, please share. Oh, hey, Rebecca, I just saw your comment. Welcome. Thank you for being here. Hi, Naomi. Thanks for joining us. I was telling some of our team members earlier how today really does feel like it's officially summer. Got some great teachers from Pennsylvania. Welcome. All right, so let's go ahead and get started. Hi, Sarah. Thanks for joining us from Wauwatosa West. So Mr. Lazarski, you must know Sarah. Feel free to unmute and say hi. All right, so it looks like we're recording and we are good to go. So thanks for joining us again. Welcome. And my name is Elisa Strada. I am Senior Director for PBS NewsHour Student Reporting Labs, or SRL for short. And those who might be new to SRL, we are a national youth journalism network connected to teachers and students in 150 schools in 46 states. And we work with the NewsHour and local PBS stations around the country to amplify student-produced journalism and content. And usually we're headquartered in the DC area, but we've been working remotely for over 3 months now since March, and we have a team of youth media producers who work closely with students on specific story assignments throughout the school year. And we also develop a lot of project-based and distance learning resources for teachers on journalism, video production, and other forms of media making. And tonight we're going to be talking all about our newest resource, our Election Journalism Toolkit for Student Journalists. So we can go ahead and go to the next slide. And this is an overview of what we'll be talking about tonight, this afternoon, not quite nighttime yet. And this toolkit that we're going to be talking about includes a lot of great resources that we hope will get you thinking about how you can do election strategy with your own student journalist this next school year, especially since a lot of schools are going to be trying to figure out how to do a mix of distance learning, in-person learning. So we're hoping to touch on all of that today, and also best practices for covering issues this election year against the backdrop of this pandemic and what we've seen in recent weeks, which is the movement for racial equality. So after some introductions, we're going to be hearing from some of our incredible friends and supporters of SRL, who will be talking about their experience so far this year with the election, how they've been engaging in elections, and that includes one of our connected educators, Chris Lazarski in Wisconsin, and one of his students, Anaya Chambers, Abby Kisa from Circle, which is the Center for Information and Research on Civic Learning and Engagement. And finally, we're also going to hear from Marie Kusick, who is one of our journalism experts and youth media producers for SRL, who's going to be sharing some tips for students to get started to think about what election coverage can look like from a student journalism perspective. And everything that we're going to be talking about today is information from our election toolkit or from some of our other resources that we've created over the past 6 months and years, really, since the history of SRL, which will get you links to towards the end of the presentation. And this presentation will also be available. So I also wanted to, before we do official introductions, just kind of give a shout out to some of the team members who are behind the scenes. So Chris Allen, who is actually the person in charge of the slides this afternoon, he is our education project manager, and he is the one who spearheaded the creation of this toolkit with me. And so huge shout out to him. And then Marcus Markle, who is our communications manager, and he's been really incredibly invested in amplifying student work, including some of the coverage that we've been doing this election year. So I just want to give him a shout out. He's the one in the chat talking to everybody and collecting all of your questions. Okay, so let's do some official introductions with our stellar panel this afternoon, and we're going to start with Marie.
Hi, everybody. It's so great to virtually be here with you. I joined SRL last summer, and before that, I spent about 10 years as a reporter. I worked in commercial stations and mostly public media stations in Albany, New York, and Harrisburg, Pennsylvania. I covered a lot of energy and environmental issues as a reporter, also covered a lot of local elections, congressional races, and super excited to be here and to talk to you about what students can do, because there's a lot of important local elections going on right in your own backyards.
Thanks, Marie. Chris, you're up.
My name is Chris Lazarski. I'm a social studies and English teacher at Wauwatosa West High School. I have advised the journalism program at our school for probably the last, about 12 years. And I've been working with SRL since 2015. So.
Hi, everyone. I'm Anaya Chambers. I'm 17 years old, a recent graduate from Wauwatosa West High School. I'm a part of the student journalism program, and I also will be attending Kentucky State in the spring, right after basic training for the Army, to major in broadcast journalism.
Hey team, this is Abby Kisa. I'm the Director of Impact at Circle, a research center at Tufts University, and I'm coming at you today from Prince George's County, Maryland.
Awesome. Thank you guys so much. And my screen just froze, so bear with me if that happens. I was trying to be in an area with a good internet connection, but yeah, just bear with me if that happens. But all right, thanks everyone. I'm excited to hear from all of you. And you know, I think just to get started, I think we can safely say that 2020 has not turned out quite like we had expected. You know, just kind of referencing from the SRL side of things, at the beginning of the calendar year, our team was working on this huge election strategy to engage middle and high school student journalists. We had surveyed hundreds of teens, asking them what issues they cared about most, what they wanted to see from us as an educational journalism organization. And one of our main projects was to create an election toolkit that could help inform student reporting around local and national elections. And then the pandemic happened. So now we're here and we're ready to restart a conversation on the elections and student voice, because we know that young people are already making their voices heard in different ways, you know, from the impact of COVID-19 on education, ongoing civil rights protests. Millions of young people are going to be eligible to vote in the 2020 election. So we are really invested in working with this part of the electorate, because our mission is all about elevating youth voice through the lens of journalism and media making. And if we go on to the next slide, I wanted to share that there is a reason why we're doing this on this day, on June 22nd. So it was on June 22nd in 1970 that President Nixon signed an extension of the Voting Rights Act of 1965 that required the voting age to be 18 in all elections. But it wasn't officially ratified until a year later in 1971, when it was officially law and it became part of the Constitution. So, you know, that was not that long ago, and we've said this before, but it was in response to a youth voting rights movement that grew during World War II, when it was President Roosevelt who lowered the military draft age. And the slogan that came out of that was "old enough to fight, old enough to vote." And so that created a movement that lasted 30 years until the age was finally lowered to 18 in the 1970s. And that's a picture that I included in that slide from the late 60s and early 70s of young people, teenagers on the streets protesting to get the voting age lowered to 18. But now we're seeing a new kind of youth movement. And you know, they're young people, all of us are equipped with an unmatched digital savviness. And I know that, I don't know if you heard over the weekend, this headline, this attention grabbing headline from the New York Times after the well-publicized Trump rally in Tulsa, Oklahoma. TikTok teens and K-pop stans, they think Trump rally. So this is a really complicated story, and it's not, you know, there's more to it than just the headline, but you know, there was evidence that videos were shared by teens telling their peers to buy rally tickets after the Trump campaign provided purchasing information. And we don't know all of the details, but it can be said that this effort really influenced the Trump campaign's expectations, since they received over 1 million unique ticket requests, but only I think official reports said 6,200 tickets were scanned at the rally. So it's a really interesting read and a really important media literacy moment, because it's an example of how young people are mobilizing in a really different way heading into this election cycle. So young people who are a part of Gen Z are making their voices heard in really unique ways, as I said. And this generation is on track to be the most ethnically diverse, well-educated, and progressive. But when we still look at the data, we say to ourselves, you know, young people are the least likely to. Why is that? And Abby is going to share a lot of really great information with you as to some of those trends and how that's changed over the past couple of years. And, you know, sometimes it's really hard to see the impact of one's vote. And there's also so much misinformation. That's something that I think is even a bigger issue than it was in 2016, when the term fake news was really politicized for the first time. So the reason why we wanted to create this toolkit, or one of the main reasons, is because we wanted to create some really concrete ways for students to think about how they can engage in elections, because our goal this election year is to help young people understand the power of their voices, and specifically through journalism, and to help them determine what issues matter to them, how they can use their voice to talk about you know, their lived experiences, and how they can connect that to what politicians are saying on the campaign trail. So I wanted to show everybody now a video that was produced by Anaya Chambers, who, as you met earlier, is here today. And she vlogged about her experience working at the voting polls during the controversial primary in Wisconsin just a couple of months ago. So let's hear Anaya's video.
Hi, my name is Anaya Chambers. I'm from Wauwatosa West High School, and I'm here today working with polls at the Washington High School poll site. As you guys can see, the lines are pretty long. They're like 2.5 blocks long. And then we have a thing called curbside voting, where people in their cars are voting instead of coming in and being engaged. People, all I can say is this is very, very long and chaotic. So currently I am in my gear to work the polling area. I just have to look at my gloves, you guys. Okay, so it is roughly 8:12. The polls have closed, but voting is still taking place because there were so many people, and they wanted to make sure that the votes and ballots all got counted. So guys, it is officially the end of voting night. The last person has walked out the door. We are packing up everything so that we can all go home. It's pretty late. We are all tired, exhausted. We've been on our feet for 20, 21 hours or so. I was counting the ballots. So when the person got done voting, they just came over to me, they stuck their ballot in the machine. I am currently not able to vote because I am only 17 years old, but for the presidential 2020 election, I will. And I will definitely take advantage of absentee voting and also early voting. The lines can get chaotic if you don't have patience. Like, it'll really take a toll on you. Today, Anaya Simone Chambers, that is me. I took a chance on myself. I became an essential worker in my community, giving back. Everyone stay safe, stay calm, believe in yourselves, love on yourselves, spend time with your family and your loved ones. Please vote. This is Anaya Simone, and I'm out.
Wow, thank you so much, Anaya, for, again, sharing that piece of media with us. And before we talk to you, I wanted to bring in your teacher, Chris Lazarski, who taught to you before you covered this experience. So Chris, can you tell us a little bit about first your connection to SRL and then about working with Anaya on this specific video?
Sure. So I have been a SRL teacher since 2015. So I've been involved with this program for the last 5 years. Just a little bit of background. So I teach social studies and English. I teach a civics class. So we do a lot of action civics kind of activities in my civics class. And then I also teach journalism, and I have two journalism classes I teach. One is a writing for publication class where it's writing and publishing, and the other one is a media video journalism class. And I also advise the extracurricular journalism program, where students are publishing on their website and then on social media, and they're doing this in written form, taking pictures or producing video. Anaya was in my first semester writing for publication class. So, a class of 30 people, people are writing, I think we wrote about 10 articles or more in that class over the course of the semester. Anaya wrote several outstanding articles for that class. Actually, one piece that was really significant about two of our former students who had died in a tragic accident. And she kind of went out and wrote that very difficult story and published it, and it had a huge impact on our community. The next semester, and I was in my media communications class, and Student Reporting Lab set out this rapid response. Hey, you know what? It's the primary in Wisconsin. Any teachers who want to, engage your students in telling stories about first-time voters or students who are doing something. And of course, my first thought was just Anaya, like, hey, you know what? She's ready to go for this. She's excited about journalism. And so I just reached out to her. Actually, I sent an email to 5 or 6 students, and Anaya came back to me and said, you know what? Actually, I'm on my way to the polls right now. And so then I hopped on, we were texting each other, and I said, okay, this is kind of the framework. This is what I think SRL was looking for. It was kind of just kind of happened that she happened to be doing this amazing thing. If you remember, in Wisconsin at this time, there was a lot of debate about would the polls be open or closed. We're in the middle of the shutdown. They were going to close them and they opened them. There was a Supreme Court rule. There's all this stuff about the polls being open. It was a huge issue in Wisconsin and nationwide. So I think, Anaya was in the right place at the right time, but she was also, she was, I think, trained to think like a journalist, which I think is important as kids are kind of going out and covering these stories. So her and I were just texting back and forth kind of throughout the day, and she was asking me questions and I was trying to give her advice. Obviously, she was really busy, right? Working at the polls is a really busy day and a really busy experience. So, she did it all. I was just there to kind of present and provide this opportunity for her, this platform for her to express herself. So
Yeah, that's great. And I also want to reiterate that we totally take safety very seriously. And I remember that rapid response. We even thought about, we don't want to encourage students to go out, especially if they're going to put themselves at risk. And we understand that that is a personal decision that some people are going to make. And right now we're in the middle of developing all of these resources to help students do these things virtually. But Anaya, in this experience you were already going to be volunteering at the polls and you decided to vlog your experience. So can you tell us about what made you decide to work that day, to take that risk during a pandemic, and why you decided that it was really important?
So for me, taking the risk was like nothing because I consider myself a risk taker. But I knew I knew the polls were going to be open because we were getting emails back and forth and they were telling us about all the precautionary measures that we were going to have to take. But the job had to still get done at the end of the day. They still needed people to work the polls because so many people canceled out when they found out like the polls are still going to be open. And I'm like, well, me wanting to be a leader in my community and being so young, like seeing somebody young around individuals who's upcoming to vote, seeing someone like myself would be, gives them the opportunity to like, maybe this is something I should do. So it kind of gives them like that green light that you should go do it. But taking the risk, it was pretty much nothing. I just knew I'd have to take precautionary measures, protecting my family and my close friends, all the people that are around me consistently. But other than that, it was something I enjoyed doing.
And so when Mr. Lazarski reached out to you, seeing if you were into this idea of capturing your experience, what made you say yes to that part of it?
I knew that I want to go to school to be a journalist, and I knew like I'm in the moment, so like right now I can just take the chance. So I just took out my phone. He always told us in class about how we had to record horizontally, so I took that into consideration. He always wanted us to be concise, get to the point, but always like make sure that details are inputted. So when I was recording the vlog, it was about 12 minutes long. I was trying to make sure that I was getting B-roll. I was able to get like straight to the point, but also like just let everyone see like what's going on. And then just kind of reiterate the importance of like getting out and voting despite everything that's going on, but making sure that you're safe while doing so.
Yeah, and what were you hoping that people got out of watching your experience on camera?
I wanted them to really get that it's okay to sometimes put yourself in the position of other people. So like I said in my video, I became an essential worker. I'm not a doctor. I don't work at a store, grocery store, all that, where I'm constantly interacting with people. But sometimes it's okay to just step out there. At the end of the day, like I said, the work has to get done. Someone has to do it. Step up, be that person sometimes. Like it's okay. And as long as you're, taking the right measures to protect yourself and protect ones around you, it's okay. So I want them also to get the point out of voting and how serious voting can be and how you can step up to the plate and be the change also.
And Chris, as her teacher, did you have any reservations engaging Anaya in this kind of activity, knowing that the risk that was involved? Any concerns with having her share that story?
Well, once I knew that she was there, I mean, I thought it was an outstanding opportunity, right? I mean, this is a concern of mine, right? I mean, it's a concern, definitely a concern of mine kind of moving forward in the next year is that being student journalists, I mean, kind of one of the great things about journalism is that students talk to adults, right? And students engage their communities and ask them questions, right? I think it's just, it's an outstanding learning framework. Journalism provides students with so many thinking skills. So that is like a huge kind of concern of mine moving forward. But knowing that Anaya was there already there working as a poll worker, I felt like I wasn't asking her to do something that she hadn't already decided to do herself. So I felt kind of much more comfortable. And Anaya is that kind of, I mean, when she was like, yeah, I'm there at the polls, I'm like, yeah, well, of course you're at the polls working. Like, this is Anaya, right? This is what she does. She's a force in our community. I mean, she's, this is just one piece you're seeing, but there's so much she does actually.
And Anaya, what are some of the things that you're doing to now inform your own peers about the issues that are important to them this election season? And what advice would you have for them when it comes to engaging both in journalism, the process of creating journalism, and voting?
So to your first question, like with my peers and getting them engaged in voting, I actually been getting a lot of questions. And I'd say we all want to combat this force of change. So we have to unite together. Voting is coming up. A lot of people tell me like, oh, my vote, it won't matter. It doesn't count. I said, every vote counts because I was there. I was able to see the entire process happen. I said, your vote will count. It just takes you to step up to the plate in order to get out and vote. And they say, and I also tell them, you know, we live in a tech savvy world. So when you're looking up candidates, like it's right there. It's very feasible for you. I can't tell you who to vote for because that's my opinion. I can't tell you who to vote for, but at the end of the day, you can look them up, look into, you know, what they're about, whatever political affiliation you consider yourself, check out those parties and make your vote. And then also connecting to media. I don't know. That's a kind of tricky question trying to add media, like me being a journalist, into the whole process.
What about like when you see or hear, you know, those barriers to voting? So you mentioned your friends say they don't think that their vote matters, or maybe there's another layer of, you know, figuring out how to vote if they can't do it in person. You know, what do you think some of those barriers are that you've heard from your friends, from your peers, and how do you help provide information so that they're aware of what to do?
I also reiterate the fact that you can do absentee voting, you can do mail-in voting. That's becoming a lot more common now, doing mail-in ballots, but also reaching out to your community officials on ways to get involved in the entire process. There's like a website, myvotewisconsin.org, that will take you through the whole step of getting registered to voting, what voting day is like now. So pretty much reaching out to your resources in your community will be a great way to get individuals to vote.
Yeah, and Chris, and one more question for you. You mentioned the challenges that you foresee, especially this year, not knowing what school is going to look like. What do you hope, you know, students get out of engaging in some kind of election assignment that is really emphasizing local coverage in addition to the national coverage?
Yeah, I mean, the way I, like in my civics class, I mean, we always talk about things, just kind of local problems and issues, right? And kind of like what matters to students individually as people, you know, what issues do they see? We do a big project in my civics class about the issue investigation. Students pick their own problem and they write a research paper about that and they do a presentation about it. You know, just, you know, they run the gamut of the different issues. But I think really engaging people in their community, asking people about those issues that they care about, and any local officials that, you know, we have. I've always found that at least in our community in Wauwatosa and Milwaukee, it's very accessible. And I think elected officials are almost kind of like excited to talk to young people, like, oh wow, people really want to, you know, people want to talk to me, I want to ask them questions too. You know, and again, journalism and students engaging in journalism, this is always a huge thrill, right? Kids are like, wow, I called up the superintendent or I called the mayor and they called me back and we're emailing, you know, and we're like having this conversation like real people. And I'm like, yeah, you're a real person, right? You get to ask people. And, you know, you get to hold, you know, ask the powerful questions, right? And I think people are happy to do that.
Yeah.
And also to Mr. Lazarski's point, me and my elected officials, like my alderman and my mayor, we connect all the time. So if I'm out in the community and I'm talking with individuals and we, like, you know, we're talking about our concerns or issues that we see, I can email my alderman or email my mayor and be able to have those conversations and, you know, let them hear my side of what I think can be a solution to a problem I may see. So they're very, very accessible to have.
That's amazing. And what would you say to students, especially who might be coming back to a school environment that's more remote, or it's going to be all distance learning? What tips would you share, Anaya, with those students who are interested but maybe a little bit more shy to engage in that kind of conversation with local leaders?
Of course, because you feel like they're in such higher power. Like, remember that they're still people. They will still communicate with you. They may, depending on who you're trying to contact, it may be a little, a little harder. You have to go through, more than just one or two people in order to contact them. But remember, they're still real people, and they're willing to hear what you have to express about issues of any sort.
Thank you. And thank you both, Chris and Anaya. And now I want to turn to Abby, who is going to share some really important information about youth voter trends, touch on some of the things that Chris and Anaya were talking about, and the impact of journalism and storytelling on youth voter engagement, and some things to keep an eye on as we get closer to November. Abby?
Thanks so much, Elise. And thanks, Marcus and Chris and the whole SRL team for this event and for all that you're doing to support young people's voices across the country. If anyone has any questions about anything, throw it in the chat. It sounds great. And a little bit about me. So I'm going to share a little bit of research today, and because I work at a research center, but we're a little bit unusual. We're a nonpartisan transdisciplinary research institute, and we focus on young people's civic development, civic engagement, and the leadership of young people in communities, especially young people who've been marginalized from civic and political life. Our tiny but mighty team is part of Tufts University's Tisch College of Civic Life. And one of the reasons why we're a little bit different than as a research center, for example, my title is Director of Impact. And that's because our bottom line for our research is to have an impact on young people's civic and political engagement. We do our work for people like you and try to listen and co-create with folks working with youth so that research helps to increase, diversify, and sustain what we consider to be a resilient youth engagement sector. So to start, I want to talk a little bit about why even talk about youth voting and youth in elections. So if we want to go to the second slide, as you can see here, one of the reasons to talk about youth in elections is because young people contribute to communities. Of course, we all know this. Anaya is an amazing example. And civic engagement, as a result, is a tool that not only develops young people, but also strengthens communities. So there are individual level outcomes, right? Developing civic outcomes, people are more likely to be engaged in the future, academic outcomes, but we're also making sure that we have a diversity of voices and representation from our communities involved in community problem solving. We also know that when we start people, research has shown that when people are engaged in civic and political life early, they're more likely to be engaged in the future because it's a learned behavior. So by focusing on young people today, we're building stronger, diverse democracy for tomorrow and years to come. And as we're going to talk about a little bit later, young people affect elections, right? We just saw an amazing example how someone who's not even 18 yet affects and supports elections through voting, right, and a range of other methods. So as Elise alluded to before, though, we're in this really interesting moment, and we can go to the next slide, Chris, with all the numbers. The one after that, yeah. We're in this really interesting moment where we just had a midterm that saw the highest youth voter turnout in at least a quarter century, and where young people had profound influence on the elections and on engagement. So a few things you should know about this moment. Between 2014 and 2018, youth voter turnout increased by 115%. We saw youth voter turnout increase in every state for which we had data in 2018, and in 31 states, it increased by at least 10 points. We also saw that youth leadership mattered a great deal. We saw that young women of color were most likely to be an active part of a movement in 2018 and trying to get their peers out to vote. 37% of young women of color 18 to 29 tried to convince peers to vote in 2018. And that matters a great deal because asking young people to vote really matters. giving basic information. And this is why, as you can see on the right side, that young people of color who were contacted at least twice during 2018 about the election and voting were 20 points more likely to vote than youth of color overall. That's a huge, huge increase. And on the next slide, we can see that this youth leadership and this connection between the issues that young people care about and elections can have a profound impact on youth participation. So in 2018, you know, the gun violence prevention movement was amplified by what happened, the tragic incident at Parkland High School. And we saw during that year that over half of young people identified with the gun violence prevention movement or were actively a part of it. And that meant that young people said they were more likely to vote. And it affected how they voted. So in 2018, we saw a youth-led movement meant that young people were registering to vote much earlier the year. More young people were being asked to vote. And subsequently, we saw higher youth turnout. We saw higher youth turnout than baby boomers midterm turnout in the 70s. And we saw high youth influence on the elections. So this was 2018. However, we also saw some things that were concerning. So for example, young people in high school were what we call undermobilized to vote. And as you can see in our analysis of the census data here, young people who were in high school were less likely to be registered and less likely to turn out than those who were in college. And there's some systematic reasons why we believe that this is the case that can be addressed by more young people talking about elections, right? And journalism can create discussion about elections and provide people with concrete information. So that was 2018. But what we want to talk a little bit more about is 2020. And man, like Elise said, 2020 has not ended up like we thought it was going to. And there's a few things about an election during a pandemic that we're concerned about. And on the next slide, you'll see that one of those things is voter registration. So we know that there's 15 million young people who have turned 18 since the 2016 election. 15 million. And while some of them will have registered to vote by the 2018 election, we still have millions more to go. But one of the things that we've learned in our research is that not all young people know about online voter registration. And so the reduction in face-to-face opportunities for young people to interact with others is particularly concerning because online voter registration isn't in every state and not everyone knows about it. And for young people who are starting, you know, who are going to register to vote for the first time, may want more support, right? And so this is one of the things that we're following this year that you may also want to pay attention to in your state. What is the voter registration rate? Are there really resources out there for people to use online voter registration if they've never done it before? Is there support? Are there people to ask questions? And this is particularly a concern for young people in low-income communities. In our research with young people to really uncover this data, we found that young people really wanted to ask a lot of questions about voter registration, make sure that they got it right. Now, the second thing on the next slide that we're following in this election cycle that I think you will want to know about is, what is it going to be like to ask young people to vote absentee or vote by mail? As you can see here in the 2016 election, 19% of youth 18 to 29 voted by mail during that election, absentee by mail. And as you can see throughout the rest of the bars, the access to that type of voting method is not equal amongst young people. It's disproportionate. And so in this election, when we're looking to expand the electorate and involve more young people in democracy, we're concerned with the access that low-income youth and Black youth have, especially those two groups have, to vote information about and the procedures for voting by mail and by absentee. So making sure that this information is clear to young people in your high school, to clear to young people in your community, is a core service that you can do and a core, piece of storytelling that you can engage in. So one of the other things that I mentioned, and on the next slide, we can talk about young people impacting elections. So this is one of the things that we produce. we still think that there's tons of possibilities for young people to affect federal elections this year, even given those challenges. And it's especially the case if candidates and campaigns really respect young people's political power, because young people have shown it. And young people are and will be hit hard by the impacts of this pandemic, and their voices deserve to be represented in decision-making about the future of our communities. So in our analysis of 24 data points, we found that young people are in a position to affect contests in states and districts all over the country, from Arizona to Montana to Kansas, Alabama, and Maine. And there's opportunities for millions of young people from all sorts of backgrounds to have an effect on these federal elections. And this is especially the case for young people of color who've shown their political power in elections over the past several cycles. So we used all these 24 data points to create a statistical model that ranked states and congressional districts by whether or not young people were predisposed to have a particularly large impact on the outcomes. Some of this data included whether young people's politics, how they compare to the state overall, historical youth turnout, and what we call facilitative election laws, and many more. And on this URL on the slide right here, you can see our interactive microsite, which you can explore, find your state, or find your district if it's on there, as well as much more data. But just to conclude, that's a slice of data that we have about young people and elections. But some of the things that I really want to point out on the final slide is recommendations for coverage. We've been doing this research for 20 years now, and we've seen a lot of coverage of young people in elections. And we believe that there's something very unique and important that young reporters bring to these conversations. The first is providing positive representations of how diverse youth are engaging. We have seen in our data that local youth organizations not only are more likely to reach younger youth, the 18 to 19-year-olds, but also more likely to reach Black and Latinx youth, really important groups of young people in this particular election and in every election. We also think that, unfortunately, some of the broader media really focus on covering just college students and flashy events. And so local reporting, young people's reporting in high schools and in communities can provide much more diverse representations and diverse voices to this conversation about democracy. And then finally, two other things. I've talked about specific and basic information who youth want to engage, and Anaya mentioned it too. And that's one real added value of reporting, regardless of who's doing it. And then finally, one of the things that we really think is important is to highlight what are schools doing? How are really amazing teachers integrating talking about elections and issues into the classroom? What's being done to help pre-register or register to vote in schools? And if you wanted to do a little bit of investigation, there's some state statutes about high school voter registration. You can see if your school or if your district is, kind of doing the work that states are suggesting. So I'm going to close there. I'm sorry to go a little bit over, Elise, but lots to talk about.
Yeah, and it's such important information just to have at our fingertips, and so much to mull over. Thank you so much, Abby. I really appreciate it. And now I want to turn it over to Marie Kusik briefly, who will share how students can translate some of this great information that Abby just shared into real stories.
Hi, everyone. Yeah, it's a really exciting time to be alive this year. What a year, as Elise mentioned, 2020. I'm going to talk to you a little bit about just the kinds of stories you can tell, give you a few suggestions, and then some audio visual tips on how to make the best of the situation, which may be filming on your phone. So these are just a few 2020 themes that we brainstormed as a team. Of course, there's so many stories. Voter access, we've seen a push to get more mail-in voting with the pandemic, voter suppression efforts, huge stories to tell about misinformation, the quality of online information. I was just watching, an ad last night from one of those political action committees that has a name like Americans for Change or something, and it was an attack ad against Joe Biden, and it said he wants to ban fracking in my state, in Pennsylvania, and it said it would cost Pennsylvania 600,000 jobs if he banned fracking. And before I joined SRL, that's all I did, and covered the natural gas industry here for 6 years. So that number, that 600,000 jobs, is completely a fake number. That's nowhere near. There's maybe 30,000 oil and gas jobs here, based on my reporting. So, you know, you can just pick an ad. You can find something that's compelling to you and fact check it. And there's, you know, so much information, so much misinformation. Share with other students. How do you find quality information? How do you find trusted sources when you're trying to look up that information? Where can you go? There's so many first-time candidates, and we've seen more women run, more people of color run. Are your public servants, are your elected officials, do they look like the community they're serving? As I mentioned earlier, I covered a lot of local races. There's a lot of, in the national media, we hear, you know, there's a lot of focus on the national elections, but a real opportunity is these local races they often are undercovered, and it isn't always because nobody cares. We've had huge problems, economic problems with the news industry for years now. Of course, more with the pandemic. Papers are going under, reporters are getting laid off. We have news deserts all over the country. So while this is obviously really not good news for our democracy, it could be a great opportunity for students who really care and are interested. You could be maybe the only person reporting on a local race, and it does matter. I think, you know, one thing I always point out is I don't think people always understand the different levers of power we have, that maybe if you want to ask questions about your police department and their behavior, I mean, they're probably controlled by the mayor of your city. So and when I covered the oil and gas industry here in Pennsylvania, I mean, it is the state government that controls all the oil and gas permits across the country. The federal government actually really doesn't have a lot of regulatory control over such a powerful industry. It is the states. So at the local level, at the state level, at all levels, there are a lot of levers of power in this country. So it's really important, I think, to cover those local races. Of course, COVID-19, we're seeing a lot of concerns around safety of gatherings. How are campaigns adjusting to that? We're seeing, unfortunately, the politicization of some of the health recommendations. Of course, we're seeing this huge social justice, civil rights movement in this moment. I know in my own community, there's been a big push to get, at my alma mater, my high school, to get them to change the curriculum. And there was a letter sent out about, hey, you need to basically do better at teaching American history to my school. Is that happening in your community? Also, citizen journalism, we have this huge opportunity, as Anaya's video showed. You can do just so much with a cell phone. And if you're there, and if you're like Anaya and you're trained and you know how to just talk about what's going on, what are you seeing, what are you hearing, you can do amazing work, and you can not only bear witness to some of these really important moments that are happening in your backyard, but you can tell a story around it and really connect with people. So yeah, cover a local race, as I said, super important. The country's full of news deserts. Explore an issue. What do you care about? How do your peers see this issue? How does your generation view it from previous generations? Again, talk about registration. Our state just changed it recently, so you can register online. It's a lot easier now. Is it changing where you are? Has it not changed? Again, who's being left out? Who's not voting? Why? What are the barriers? You could talk to somebody who's doing this for the first time. Are they nervous? Do they know the actual mechanics of where to go and what to actually do? And just think about what's an undertold story in your community. What do you think people should be hearing about that they're not hearing about? Okay, so audiovisual tips. Obviously, right now we're still in this pandemic. We don't know how this is all shaking out with different parts of the country reopening. So I can't really give blanket advice here other than to just say, please be safe. And it might be easier to get a hold of people right now if they're at home. We found that in some cases. Of course, you can do so much with a smartphone. As Anaya's video showed, amazing video quality. Basically, this is a great tool to have, your smartphone. And there can be just a few cheap things you can add if you're able to, like a tripod or a lav mic that can make it just look and sound better. I mean, the key thing is we want you to keep the video steady and we want it to sound good. And if you can't have a tripod, I mean, if you're going to interview someone, just put your phone on like a bookshelf or a pile of books or just something to keep it stable. And without a microphone, just make sure you're in a quiet room, or if you're out in a noisy place, like I'm imagining if Anaya was interviewing somebody in that space that looked really busy, like maybe just go out in the hallway or somewhere where it's quieter. And that's it for me.
Awesome. Thanks so much, Marie. And as you mentioned, those tips with using your phone, it's so easy now that I think expectations around broadcast and video quality have definitely lowered during the pandemic, and major news organizations now see how easy it is to broadcast, and people are still getting that really important information. And I think as long as you have a decent quality picture and good audio, then that's all that matters. So it's a lot easier in many ways to do some of this journalism that would have been maybe more difficult if we were in a different time. So everything that Marie talked about is in our election toolkit, and if it's not there yet, it will be soon. But some easy lifts that you can get started with is, in that toolkit, I have the link there, and Marcus is going to share that in the chat as well. But we have these really great voter resources here, because we knew that when we were taking on this toolkit, there were so many great resources that were already available from other organizations. And so we didn't want to duplicate that work. And so we have linked in there, places like Circle, like NewsHour Extra, which is part of, the work that we do, and MediaWise, which does a lot of work on misinformation. And so just to get started looking at those resources, the how-tos that a lot of students are looking for. And we're going to be coming up with a specific A1 assignment, which is what we traditionally do at the beginning of the school year, that's tied to the election. A couple of years ago, we did for the midterm elections, turning out the youth vote in America. So that's going to be something that we come up with and that we share and put on the toolkit. But we also encourage teachers to try KQED's Let's Talk About Election 2020 challenge, which is also linked in the toolkit. It's a youth media challenge that asks students to deeply think about the issues they care about and writing commentary. So this is in journalism, but this is starting by asking students to think about the issues that matter to them and telling the stories that are important to them from a personal perspective. So that's something that anybody can use, whether you're a journalism teacher, film, broadcast, social studies, English, to really get students thinking critically about how they can connect the issues that they're thinking about to what's happening in the elections. And then we also have this really great rapid response called My Registration Story that Leah Clapman came up with. And it's a rapid response asking students to talk about what it's like to register to vote, as Marie mentioned. So that's in there as well. And then for more medium lifts, so if you have more experienced students, we have curriculum to help students learn best practices for interviewing a politician, how to interview a voter, and how to get started on researching school boards. There are a lot of student representatives on school boards, and that number is increasing every single year. So a lot of decisions about what happens in schools are made on school boards, so have students investigate that. And as Marie mentioned, we really want to emphasize that local politics matter, and students can have a bigger voice on the local level. And then for more experienced students, in this toolkit, there are a lot of heavier lifts. So if students want to do some deeper voter profiles or full news packages on ballot issues, we have resources to get them started on that. And as I mentioned before, I think it's so important for students to think about the impact of misinformation. So dissecting an ad, fact checking. As I mentioned, one of our partners is MediaWise, and they're coming up with this really extensive voter project curriculum that specifically talks about, how to fact check during this election year and how much has changed. So that's going to be available for teachers to use, and probably in the next month or so. But I think to conclude the session, there is so much opportunity for teachers, for students, for young people to think about how to engage in elections through journalism, through media making, and just really how to make sense of it all, because sometimes it feels like it's a fire hose of information coming at us. But there are really easy, concrete ways just to kind of take that first step and start thinking about how these things impact you and impact the community around you. And for support, if you're thinking about, how do you get started, we will be hosting office hours, which is something that we started after we launched our coronavirus curriculum. So this is in addition to the ongoing support that our youth media producers provide to their schools and their portfolios. If you're not an official part of SRL and you are interested in talking to one of our producers about technical support that you may need, a story idea, we have these office hours that we've established, and you can email that admin@studentreportinglabs.org email to schedule something, and you might be able to talk to somebody like Marie or one of our 4 other producers who are on hand to help out. So easy first steps that you can take following this this webinar. Think about what you want to talk to your students about when you get back after the summer, and just explore the toolkit. You have a lot of time right now, and then share it with other teachers, with students that you may stay in touch with, and then have a conversation at the beginning of the school year. Decide as a class or as a student newsroom whether that's going to be in person or virtually, what the focus will be and how to divide and conquer. And again, as everybody on this panel has mentioned, there are so many opportunities to go out and report on something that's going to impact your community. So you can just start by having that conversation and identify the coverage that is most important to you. So now we're going to take, with the last few minutes that we have, some questions. And if we run out of time, which I know that we will, we only have a few minutes, you can always send your questions to us at admin@studentreportinglabs.org. We're also on Twitter, Facebook, and Instagram. Please share this information with other educators and with students as well, but we'd love to answer some of the questions that you have. And while we're waiting for those questions, I want to open it back up to our panel to share any last thoughts.
One thing I forgot to say that I really want to emphasize is that when you're covering a campaign, they're often disorganized and they often won't get back to you right away. So I think it's awesome, Anaya, you're really connected to your local politicians. But one thing I've seen from other students is they're like, oh, they didn't call me or email me back. And it's like, that's okay. Just keep calling, keep emailing. They do that to everybody, even reporters for major news outlets sometimes. So don't be shy.
And sometimes they do get back, right? I mean, I've had kids attend Obama rallies as part of the press corps, at the, debates and stuff like that. Just by, I'm a student, I want to do this. And they say yes. And kids are like, really? We're like I'm standing next to the BBC. I'm like, yeah, you are, because you're a journalist too. So.
That's great. And I see Ben had a question. So will this be one of the 4 video assignment options this fall? So all of the things that are available on the toolkit are for anybody. Like I mentioned, we haven't decided what is our very focused A1 that will culminate into a project that we share before the November election. That's still to come, but all of these resources are things that you can just go ahead and do. You may not even be able to do that A1 assignment for whatever reason, but then there's a million other options that you can go through in this toolkit that might work for your class. And then I want to share a question that's for Anaya, actually. So Anaya, how can young people use social media platforms like TikTok, Instagram to create change or to mobilize other young people from your perspective?
So for me, I know I use my Instagram as a platform to bring upon change or different movements. Continue to post. Make sure that when you're posting, whatever you're the point you're trying to make sure that it's very clear, and have your peers share. And then always remember that there's people that's listening, people that are watching, people that are hearing you. So just continue to post, because sometimes you might post about wanting to start a movement of some sort, with, for example, in regards to social change, and you may feel like people aren't hearing, people aren't listening. Just continue to post, because people will see, people will catch on, people will, they'll get to the point eventually. And then also just remember to, have your peers share your posts and things like that. I know for me, whenever I post something in regards to something political or something I just have going on, like I tell my peers, I'm like, post this or like reshare, because their people, their followers, they'll see. And it's just like a trickle effect. Everyone will catch on eventually.
Yeah, and as you know, and I like being informed really does help you make decisions about the issues you choose to care about, and ultimately, who you vote for and what you vote for. So that's super, super important. All right, well, I want to thank you one more time to say thanks to all of our panelists. Thank you so much for sharing such valuable information. And, this is only going to be the first of many conversations that we have about the elections and how students can really use their voice to tell stories that are important this year. So thank you, everyone. Let's all unmute and say goodbye. Thanks, everyone who attended.
Thank you, guys.
Thank you.
Thanks, everyone.
Bye-bye.
Bye.